I've survived over 7,000 days in hardcore Minecraft, and during this time, I haven't used a single totem. Previously, I worked on building the creeper farm decoration and building a few farms around the side. If you missed that, the full series is linked in the description. Continuing on from the last 1,000 days, I got to work on the tunnel that connected my end portal to the creeper farm. This was here so that I could easily travel back to spawn chunks, which is located around 13,000 blocks away. I started by gathering some chorus fruit from the end, which I then needed to combine with blaze rods to make the end rods for decoration. After collecting the chorus fruit and a bit of endstone for building as well, I headed into the nether and set up a beacon to get the strength to effect. This would allow me to kill the blazes quicker. And I spent the next day using the blaze farm to get all the rods. Once that was collected, I headed towards the tunnel to go and decorate. I crafted the end rods and first fixed all the lava out of place because it was looking messy going in all different directions. I used the end stone I gathered from the end earlier to make some walls and started using these as part of the side pillars. I then hid the end rods behind this so that the light would shine through and keep it nice and well lit. I started to decorate the flooring of the tunnel by adding in some stairs to give some depth to the floor, and filled in the middle section with solid lava. You have to respect the process here a little. It's going to take a while to get the right design. I placed the rest of the lava buckets and grabbed some copper ore I had saved from when I dug out the area. Then I put this down and used the fortune enchantment on my pickaxe to get way more drops, as I was going to need a lot of copper blocks for decorating this tunnel. Once I mined all the copper, I crafted them into blocks and started to place them throughout the tunnel. I wanted to try a different style with the pink stairs in the ground, and it ended up giving the floor a really cool pattern. I repeated this floor section down to the end of the tunnel in the exact same way, and I also waterlogged the blocks to contrast the lava. Now it was time to fill in every single middle section. So I grabbed a few empty shulker boxes and filled these all with buckets of lava from the nether. I spent the following days just placing lava in all the gaps and heading back and forth from the nether. After a few days, that part of the floor was complete, and now I needed some glass to put over the top so I could actually walk safely over the floor and not straight into lava. I headed towards spawn chunks and grabbed some poppies from the iron farm, which I then used to make red dye. I traded with the villagers to get some glass and next crafted up the purple glass, which I could then use on top of the lava to keep the walkway safe. I used up the extra glass to fill in the walls for the tunnel, which looked out into the cave. For the rest of the walls, I'll leave them for now because I wanted to do a more complex design. The next part I wanted to work on was going to be the entrance of the area. I started out by making a small staircase with a bit of decoration. For the entrance, I wanted a grand design since the tunnel was so large. Before building this, I spent a day in the end collecting a few more chorus fruits for the end rods, because I'm going to need some lighting. I started by jotting a design down with the blocks, trying to make 2 archways to fit the double staircase. Then I swapped out the blocks to add a circle on top of each side and added lighting as a finishing touch. With the entrance complete, it was time to think of a design for the inner walls of the tunnel. My first idea was to have lava pouring down all the sides with a pattern of blocks in front. After trying a few different things, there wasn't really anything that worked. Time for my second idea, which needed some concrete. After heading to spawn to grab some sand and quickly making some different colors of concrete, I then built an Among Us character. Anyway, after tearing that terrible design down, I finally had come up with something that caught my eye. I put water and lava behind each one so that I could compare which one looked better. It still wasn't quite right for either, so I decided I was going to put black concrete with purple glass in front to give it a slight shine. And after heading back from some resource collection in the end, I ran into a thunderstorm where I risked my world once again to get some more mob heads for decoration. Once the weather was back to normal, I continued building the walls of the tunnel, putting the design in front of each of the concrete. This took a couple days with a few trips to get more materials. Then I put a purple ring around the inside of each wall and filled the remaining blocks with purple glass. The final step of the walls was putting the finer details in place, adding lighting and trapdoors. I wanted some extra things down the floor of the tunnel, so I crafted some armor stands and different armor sets to see if anything would look good. After trying a few different sets, the diamond armor was the best, and I had a lot of diamonds left over from the digging. So I crafted loads and decorated all the armor stands using them to line the sides of the tunnel. After messing around designing a few more smaller details, it was time to connect to the portal room. This is going to have one exit and one entrance at the bottom. And the first design I wanted to try was having a dragon head above. I converted some of the concrete for building materials. I tried to make it as realistic as possible, but there wasn't as much space as I needed, so I ended up taking it down and going with a simpler design. The entrance will have a water elevator to get up, and the exit will just have water to break the fall. I could now get between the creeper farm and the end portal room quickly. It just needed some tidying up. Before starting work on the portal room, I was going to complete the roof of the tunnel. The first thing I did was add some structure with the beams of wood, then spent the next few days collecting and filling in the rest of the ceiling with purple blocks. I added some final blocks and lighting around the top sections of the tunnel, and with that, the inside of the tunnel was complete. Now I just had to clean up the outside of it by covering some bits with blocks and connecting some final pieces together. And the outside of the tunnel was complete as well. It was time to start decorating the portal room. So the first thing I needed to do was clear a bunch of space. I started clearing and built some stairs so I could walk straight into the portal. Half of the room wasn't covered by the beacon, so I quickly put a new one down just so I could have the haste effect all throughout the room. I started to lay some flooring down until I had to head to the end to get some more. For this room design, I went with the same style as the tunnel and wanted to have a cool area with a large fake island underneath. I started by building the top part by putting railings and pathways all heading towards the central portal. Then I tried out a few wall combos to see what would fit with the bottom section, and fitted a different portal to the nether into one of the walls so I could get here quickly from the nether side. It wasn't long till I had run out of warped logs, so I headed to the blast chamber area. But after growing a few trees, I headed past the gold farm on my way back to the portal room, and waited for the piglins to trade some gold for quartz. I then swapped these quartz blocks into the bottom walls, which tied the bottom section nicely together. My plan for the top of the wall was to have a giant creeper face to signify that this was the end portal room for the creeper farm. The first creeper face was way too big, so I scaled it down and put some glass in front of it. Then mirrored it to the second side as well. I took a little break in the end to gather up some more endstone, then filled up the rest of the wall to the top and started to do the same walls from the tunnel on the side of the portal room. After a few days of farming materials and building up the other two walls, all I needed now was the ceiling. I used alternating stripped warped logs to start out with, and then built a scaffolding platform underneath so I could swap out some of the blocks to add more detail. I used string to hold up some concrete powder because we won't be able to see the string from the floor, and without it the blocks will just drop down. Then I rearranged the lights to be randomly scattered throughout. Once I was done, I could then punch out the scaffolding and it all came gracefully down. Kinda. Now it was time to work on the floating island underneath. Again, the first step was to mine it all out, and I did this in a circular shape which took me around 10 days. Then I filled up the edges with black concrete to give it a void effect as if there was no end to the room. I used the trusty bucket trick, placing the concrete powder first, then pouring water after. The next step was to shape the island, so I grabbed some grass blocks and placed in the island floor with some hidden lighting under moss carpets. I changed out the blocks in the water elevator first so that I wouldn't wash away any of the plants I grew in the future. Then I spammed down some bone meal to grow flowers and made a custom tree on the island. After this, I made a little pond in the middle with a waterfall and a little bridge to walk over from one side to the other. I filled in the sections above with glass so I could look down onto the island and just stand safely above. But this wouldn't be a proper project if we didn't have some danger. So I decided to go out and grab a bunch of creepers, as I wanted to name tag them all and have the island be filled with them. After losing track of a few of the creepers, I finally led them into the room one by one and kept them in boats so they wouldn't blow me up while I was trapping another. I had a couple silly moments like accidentally sitting inside of a boat, but for the most part there wasn't too many explosions. Once all the creepers were in the boats on the island, I then had to use a bow to destroy the boats from above. Now that all the boats were destroyed, the creepers could freely roam the island as much as they want. With that, the portal room was complete with the creeper farm decoration all tied in. When I headed back towards the creeper farm room, I noticed that something was missing. The middle of the room was meant to be the main part of this build, as it was the creeper farm, and I couldn't even see it. So I spent the next few days putting some lighting around the farm. It wasn't long until I had no more end rods, so I used the blaze farm for a bit. I put the end rods all around and it really lit up the creeper farm. I also lit the secret room in the middle of the farm. Now for the flooring of the creeper farm, something also felt missing. I wanted to make pathways all throughout connecting to different areas. I started by placing in some dark prismarine slabs and removing all the glass out of the way. Then for the sides, I just had deep slate blocks with lighting to connect as railings. I placed this all around for about 10 days until I needed to get some more prismarine. While waiting for the guardian drops to make more slabs, I tried to flatten out some more of the island nearby. In this world, I don't AFK at all, so I always try to do something productive. I spent the next few days just digging blocks and then had to expand the beacon out so I could continue with the instant mine. I mined the last little part of the island, then crafted the prismarine shards into blocks and headed back to the creeper farm. A few more days were just spent placing in the pathways, and by this point I needed more lighting. So I grabbed a few stacks of chorus fruit and a few stacks of blaze rods, combined them together, and then continued to light up the area with the end rods. Once it was lit up enough, I carried on with the pass for the next 18 days until I needed to craft some more slabs from the guardian farm. After that, it was time to put some kelp in each of the pillars to turn the water into source blocks. Once I break the kelp, it will make a water elevator so I can get in and out of the farm as quick as possible. And I also planned a space for dropping back in. so I could safely have water at the bottom that would break my fall and not lose my hardcore ults. Since I essentially just did the same thing for the next few days, we can skip forwards a bit. I just placed in paths and connected water elevators in each of the pillars to the surface. Now for the finishing touches on the path, I wanted a way to cover up these bedrock pieces sticking out. The first thing I tried was black carpet scattered around. It didn't look too good, so I just ignored it for the moment and got on with putting some sea lanterns around with warp trap doors above to stop the slimes from spawning. I then tried putting in some moss carpet for comparison, and neither one really worked. I tried a few more options, and in the end it looked better just keeping the bedrock in place. So I went and grew a few more warp trees for the trap doors and finished putting all the lighting in the ground. This meant the pathways on the ground were done. The thing I wanted to do next was connect all the pillars in some sort of way. My idea was to have bridges to each outer pillar, so if I wanted to walk all the way around, I can. I started by marking out a circle which would intersect with each pillar. I did the corner section first to make sure it actually looked good. Next, I started designing the bottom structuring of the bridge, connecting the logs with deep slate walls at first. Then, I had end rods hanging down and covered the prismarine with wooden planks. This meant it would stick out from the ceiling when looking up from down below. I could still see a part of the prismarine from above the wall, so I ended up swapping out the walls for hoppers. With the bottom structuring done, I continued with the top part, swapping out the end pieces of log with curved pieces instead to blend it better. To make the bridge complete, I used chains to connect it to the ceiling to make it seem as if it was being held from above. I then messed around with the interior of the first pillar to make it so I could exit the water elevator and just walk out onto the bridge. After this, I just spent a few days marking out the rest of the bridges all the way around the circle. I took a break to get some bone meal from the nether to go grow some food as I was running low. After placing in a few shulkers of gravel, I crafted out the prismarine blocks and I was on my way. For almost the next 10 days, I finished up fixing the paths and I could finally get back to completing the bridges. I marked out some blocks for where the bridges were going to be, but it wasn't long till I had run out of spruce woods. Then I got back to building the bridges, just repeating the same bridge from before, copied on each side. Once that was done, I put water on each level so I could actually travel here without using the elytra. While I was standing on the bridge, I could see one of the caves still had loads of blocks out of place, so I used clay blocks to blend them in. With that, everything underneath the hole was done. It was time to go to the surface. The plan for the top section was to blend the hole into the landscape. The first thing I needed to do was to remove all the netherrack I used to initially mark out the circle all those thousands of days ago. The next step was then to start building a sort of mountain shape over the entire perimeter. And for this, I wanted to make a sort of amphitheater shape so that the light could still flow into the area, but also have most of it covered. I got to work by using a lot of stone that I had saved from when I mined out the area, and put all the blocks down in a random pattern, trying to make it look as much like a mountain as possible. I then had to fill in grass over the mountaintop. The grass that was left from the mining process was used up pretty quick, so I headed to my spawn chunks to steal some grass because eventually I'll fix up this area with different blocks anyway. Back over at the mountain, I wanted to cover every single block of stone with grass, and already the difference was noticeably better. I continued placing the blocks, making sure to double check that I wouldn't miss any. Once all the grass was in place, I then put down torches to make sure no creepers would be jumping on my head. Then started to work on the rest of the circle by placing a ring of cyan terracotta. Next, I crafted purple glass, which will be used to fill the gap between the two rings of terracotta. I wanted to have a view out to the ocean, so I removed all the stone that I had there temporarily and switched in the glass to see how it would look. I needed concrete powder, so I farmed loads of sand and traded for the glass that was needed to fill the ocean side. Once back at the hole, I cleared out some space where I was going to put the concrete into. I just cleared blocks for about 10 days and then started to build up the sides with the concrete powder. After most of the center blocks were cleared, I started to flatten out the ocean floors so the glass areas actually had something to look out on. With a few trips back and forth to trade for materials and switch between building up all the edges, after 20 days, I didn't need any more glass. Now, to fill in the gaps between the glass and the concrete, I was going to pour water down. I put temporary stone blocks in place, then went to grab some ice. All that was required to do now was to go around the circle, breaking the ice in the temporary blocks and allowing the water to flow into the gaps. I took a quick trip to the Guardian farm and crafted some sea lanterns. The stone on this side still looked strange, so I decided to do some terraforming to blend it towards the hole. I added and removed blocks trying to make it look as natural as possible. And again, I put grass blocks on top to add some color into the hill. Next, what I needed was an entrance to the creeper farm from the nether. I put a huge portal inside one of the sides and left most of the glass for now. I waited till nighttime to see where all the mobs were spawning, and then I used lanterns to prevent this. I finished the rest of the terraforming around the place, making sure to light up all the areas. I had a couple setbacks from creepers, but I kept building and blending the mountain. I used some glowberries to light up underneath the mountain. I just placed them wherever there was shadows. What I wanted next was to have all the levels connected so I could walk between each layer. I planned out a quick staircase design using quartz and cyan terracotta, and built these all the way down one side of the circle so I could walk right from the top down to the bottom. I crafted the cyan terracotta and continued building the other staircases. I had some leftover beacons, so I used this as a bit of a flex and used this to light up the middle of each staircase. I decided I wanted rows of moss across each layer, which gave it a really cool pattern. As I was placing carpets, there was a thunderstorm, so I took a break to mess with the charge creepers. Once it was daytime again, I refilled my inventory from the moss farm and got back to filling in the rest of the layers with carpets. After a few days of filling, all the layers now had moss and no slimes could spawn. All I needed to finish off this whole area was some lighting hidden underneath the carpets. So I crafted some sea lanterns and scattered them around to make sure there wasn't any places without light. With that, the whole creeper farm area was complete. The creeper farm in the middle, along with the 4 different side sections. The cactus, kelp, sugarcane, and bamboo farm, and then the tunnel which led down to the end portal. The only problem is I've left shulker boxes everywhere. And in each of these shulker boxes, there's hundreds of different items to sort through. I could do this manually, but that would take an extremely long time. So I think it's finally time to build an automatic storage system. I wanted to build this storage system out of the way and somewhere I could easily get to from anywhere in the world. I had the perfect idea. I was going to build this in the end. In the end realm, it's quite empty as well, which means the lag will be reduced. And this is super important because when sorting hundreds of thousands of items, it's definitely going to lag. One problem with building here is that the void is everywhere, and if I fall into the void, I'm dead. So the first plan was to lay out a safety net using glass, and then having water over the top to break my fall. I spent the next 20 Minecraft days just laying down glass all the way across this section of the void. Then, once it was all ready, I just used a bucket of water to spread water sources all the way across, just so I wouldn't accidentally die from fall damage. The first thing I realized was the storage was going to be much larger than I first anticipated. So I'd need to expand out the platform with a lot more glass. I started to unlock more villagers because the more I have, the quicker I can trade and I don't have to wait around for them to refresh their trades. Each villager also has a certain amount of items they'll be willing to trade you each day. After enough trades, I then go back to expanding the void safety net all the way across. Every time I ran out of glass, I took breaks to trade for more and unlock more traders at the same time. I continued going back and forth many times until I had a large enough area ready to have the storage system built above. Oh, and I also made sure to fill the water in as I didn't want to accidentally splat onto this platform. Now, for the storage, I needed some materials to get me started. I farmed loads of acacia trees over at the tree farm because I was going to need an insane amount of chests. The next thing I needed was grey concrete, so I collected the sand and crafted the concrete, which again, I used the blast chamber to make into solid blocks. I also made some white concrete as well, so I just had different options to build with. To start, I grabbed some netherrack to make some temporary tunnels all the way to where the storage would be. I then filled up all the tunnels with water so I could use a lead to guide a dolphin all the way through. Next, I went to the ocean in search of a dolphin, and I quickly realized I was in the wrong type of ocean and dolphins don't even spawn here. This put a bit of a spanner in the works because the end portal room I decorated from earlier in the video, that was going to be how I get them into the end. But since there was no warm oceans nearby, I had to scrap that plan and go to the first end portal I'd found in the world. I knew a warm ocean was close to it, and once I found the old portal, I then quickly made a water pathway and guided a dolphin all the way into the portal room. When it finally jumped into the end portal, I then led the dolphin to the end gateway. This means it will be teleported straight to the storage area. And for now, I trapped him temporarily in a box with some water inside. I then got to work leading a second dolphin to join his friend in the box. Now that I had 2 dolphins, I could start to work on the first part of the storage. The storage system I went with is designed by cubic meter. The main idea is that I can dump all my random items or shulker boxes into a chest, and then the system will process all the items and sort them into the correct chest from the water stream. Step 1 was going to be unloading all the items and getting them into the water stream. I placed in all the hoppers, which were going to be used to suck out all the items as fast as possible. Next, I needed a target block as a piece of the redstone, and this requires wheat. And since I don't have a wheat farm still, I had to manually harvest some. After getting the extra redstone pieces, I then made sure all the minecarts were locked in place with the blocks so they didn't move out of place. I connected all the other components together and then double checked to see if this part of the redstone was working by removing the redstone block. Once I made sure it was all working, I then went to the shulker farm and made a new shulker box which is going to be filled with ice. When items travel across the top of ice, they slide and move faster, so that just means we can sort them faster. Next, the shulker box unloader was built on top. This means I could throw any shulker box in and it would take out all the items from it. The redstone being built on this part is to check if I'm putting a shulker box into the system or just putting items straight into a chest. If the items have already been unboxed, then they need to bypass the shulker box unloader. Otherwise, everything is just going to break. Then I started making a tube upwards so that I can make a water elevator and send all the items higher to have space to sort them out. The next step was making the chest area where once the shulker boxes had been emptied, I could then use them again and pick them up from here. I made the other side of the chest as well, which is going to be items that can't be sorted. Basically anything non-stackable like minecarts, music discs, anything like that. After that, I started to mark out the sorting area, which is going to be all the way along to the end, and slowly started to put in each piece of redstone. The part I'm making now will just have an individual item in each hopper locked in place by this redstone. And that way, only the item that matches the hopper flows across the top, and that hopper will pick it up. Any other items will then just float right by until they find their correct position. I placed in all the redstone for the bottom layer, and then started on the next layer up. This machine was going to be sorting pretty much every single item in Minecraft, and I'll need around 600 item sorters. I then placed in the droppers which would send the sorted items into the final chests. Next, I needed to gather some more ice, and I worked a bit more on the redstone until I'd run out of items. So I got some more quartz from the gold farm traders and then used my wither skeleton farm to get some bones. After a few days, I should have plenty of wood now. It was time to start placing in the water stream. I had the ice underneath and the water flowing over the top with scaffolding to stop it flowing in the wrong direction. After having one side of the sorting fully completed, it was now time to repeat this on the other side. Here's an example of how to fill the sorting of a hopper. By putting 21 renamed netherrack pieces spread across the last 4 slots of the hopper, and then having 24 of the item I want to sort in the first slot, this signal strength will be at the max, and only the item in the first slot will be able to flow into this hopper. So, for the next few days, I just mirrored the design across to the side, taking regular breaks to trade for more redstone when I ran out too. The way I'm building it is doing it layer by layer. It makes it a lot easier for me to remember what piece needs to be where, and as I'm building in patterns, I can just rinse and repeat on autopilot. After running out of concrete, I spent some days collecting sand and using the concrete machine to make it into solid blocks. This made it easier to build rather than using concrete powder, which could just fall down. A few more days of building, and I was just putting in the final blocks for the sorters, which blocked the redstone from interfering with each other. I then extended out the water stream to have it loop back around and go past the dolphin over and over so the items can never despawn. Next, I filled in all the chests across where the items were individually going to be sorted into. And I connected the hoppers into the back of these chests so that the items could actually flow into the final chest. I had to go around the world and collect at least one of each item to put into the storage system to set the item filter for each hopper. I went to the nether and gathered a bunch of nether plant items, then back to the overworld to collect the last few plants. When I was finally back over at the storage system, I made a bunch of item frames. This is going to be used to display where each item is. I started labeling the chests and putting the item filters into the hopper in the same row. After a few days of organizing, I mined a few shulkers of netherrack, and this was going to be renamed to a unique item so they could never enter the storage system. I then preloaded each hopper with these renamed items because all 600 of the sorters would eventually need these filter items. After multiple days of renaming and collecting more blocks, I filled up every single hopper. And I started to grab some of the items I collected earlier to put into the left-hand slot of each hopper. When I put an item into the hopper, I then placed the block or put the item into a frame in front of each one, so I knew exactly which chest was which. Once all the flowers and wood items were all sorted, it was time to get the food items. Anything I saw, I had to kill to get their meat. I kept going down the list of every item I had to collect, and some things were easier, like every type of leaf, and every time I filled up 2 boxes of items, I would then go back to the storage system and make sure they were all sorted. I kept grabbing more blocks and sorting them, until finally I'd run out of space. So what I needed to do was to break the end of the storage water flow and then expand some more item sorters. I crafted the redstone components and then just expanded the rows, copying the exact same pattern as before. I needed some more chests, but somehow ended up breaking the blast machine. I'm not even sure how this time, but after a few days of fixing and replacing some blocks, it seems to be working again, and I can finish off placing the chests in the end. The next blocks I got was every color of concrete and every color of wool, along with the carpets, so I had to get extra. I then put all the redstone items into place and got a few random items since I was getting closer to everything being sorted. I then killed a wither out in the end because I needed a beacon to sort into the system, and I spent a few days making all the variations of terracotta. I spent multiple days just collecting all the rest of the items, and the list seemed never ending. I made sure each time to go back to the storage to get them sorted. I started to expand the other side of the storage to match the extension I did earlier. The final few items I had to collect were all the coral blocks. So I found a coral reef and stole each variation of the coral. I also had to make banners, so I waited a few days at the temporary sheep farm for all the wool to grow. And with those final items, the storage had the capability to sort pretty much any item. I spent the next few days connecting the water stream to give it the ability to run across every single hopper. It could then loop back around to get refreshed by the dolphin until each of the item had been sorted correctly. It was finally time to test. So I put a few items into the system and they started flowing around the system, and it was working. Each item ended up sorted into the correct chest. The next part to worry about was going to be the overflow, because if an item doesn't exist in the storage system, then it needs a place to go. After placing all the rails on both sides, making sure that all 600 item sorters were connected, I could then start work on the overflow part. All this part would do is loop the water around in a circle until all the items were into these chests. Now that it was all set up, I slowly started to put items into the system and everything was working as intended. That meant it was time for the real test. I threw many shulker boxes into the system just to limit test and see how much lag it would cause with the thousands of items flowing around on the ground at the same time. There was a slight bit of lag, but building this in the end realm really paid off because it was handling all the items and sorting them into their designated chests without lagging the world out. The storage is pretty much complete, so I started to put more and more shulkers into the system to be sorted. All the stone boxes in and just see how the system would handle it. Once the countdown timer ran out, all the items that were left over actually went into the last section, and the dolphin managed to keep up and none of the items despawned. Although it took ages to sort the items, they all eventually got sorted. However, just like that, I had made it to day 7,000. Over these last 1,000 days, I completed many projects. The creeper farm was finally finished. The storage system was now in place. But that's it for this episode. So stay safe, stay wicked, stay bussin', and peace. Hey there, Minecraft warriors. Are you ready to dive headfirst into the depths of the Ultimate Gaming Challenge? Whoa, get your pickaxes ready, because we're taking Minecraft to the next level.